Have you ever been in a job interview and the recruiter or the HR person or the hiring manager said something and you go, that's probably a bad sign? I know I've been there. In today's video, I'm going to give you 10 things that you never want to hear in a job interview. Let's go. Now, the first thing that you never want to hear in a job interview is, okay, let me ask this in a different way. What that means is the recruiter or the hiring manager has asked you a question and you answered something different. You didn't say what they were expecting you to say. You didn't answer their question. And by their definition, you were not responding to their actual question. Whether you're intentionally dodging it or you're not getting it, either way, you're not giving them what they want, and you never want to hear that. You hear that a couple times, and they're probably going to be out on you as a candidate. Now, this next one is actually something that I have said as a recruiter to candidates, and that one is, okay, so we've got a lot to cover here, so maybe if you could just go through some of the highlights of blank. What's happening there is that the recruiter or the hiring manager has a lot of things to cover. And they're concerned that they're not going to be able to cover it all in the remainder of the time, probably because you have been long-winded in the initial questions, right? So they've been asking you questions and you've been taking a longer time than they anticipated and, quite frankly, than they prefer. They want you to be more succinct, have better economy of words, and be a little bit quicker in answering their interview questions. So if they tell you, hey, can we hurry this up? Or, hey, if you could just give me the highlights here, what it means is you're taking too long and you don't want to hear that in a job interview. Another thing that you never want to hear in a job interview is, we are really early in the process and we have a lot of other candidates. That very well may be true. But I have to tell you, I have interviewed thousands and thousands and thousands of people over the last 13 years. And if I really like a candidate, if they're like my A candidate or even my B candidate, I'm not telling them we have so many people to interview and we're at the very beginning and there's so many other candidates, because I don't want them to feel like they don't have an opportunity. I don't want to push them away. I want them engaged and interested and not feeling like it's a lost cause. So if you hear that in a job interview, it is probably not a good thing. Now, the next thing that you never want to hear in a job interview is something along the lines of, the hiring manager wanted me to specifically ask you about blank, and that blank is something bad. Maybe it's about, you having a lack of certain experiences or certain tools or softwares, or maybe it's about a concern in your resume. What that's telling you is that, yes, they were interested in moving forward with you, but the hiring manager was like, you know what? I don't like this about their background. Could you check in on it? If they say that, then it means the hiring manager, without talking to you, already has a concern, and you're probably going to need a really great interview in order to get over that hurdle. This one's a bit obvious, but you never want to hear it in a job interview. If they say anything along the lines of, well, it seems like you sure have moved around a lot, that's a bad sign. You don't want to hear that. It probably means they have labeled you as a job hopper. That might be a bit of an old school mentality, and if, you've been at a place like 3, 4, 5 years, it's also wildly unrealistic to call that, like that you've moved around a lot, but it means they're concerned about it. Fair or unfair, they're concerned about it. You don't want to hear that in a job interview. Now, the next thing is kind of twofold, and it's, you're saying we a lot. Can you tell me a little bit about what you've specifically done? Or they say, I notice you say I a lot. Was this part of a team or was this something you've done solo? I've made videos on this in the past, but it's really important you strike that balance between I and we. The reality is, most hiring managers are going to want to hire great teammates. But also, most hiring managers are going to want people who make impacts, and you can specifically communicate what you have done in past roles. So striking a balance between I and we is important. If they call out specifically that you're not doing enough of either, that's probably a problem. You never want to hear that in a job interview. The next thing that you never want to hear in a job interview is they're asking you a question that you have clearly already answered. So maybe you told them that you got your MBA from blank school, and then later in the interview they go, okay, do you have any education past your bachelor's degree? You've already said it. What does that mean? It means they're not engaged, you've lost them, they're not paying attention, and maybe they're not that interested in you as a candidate. Either way, if they're asking you a question in which you have already answered it, that is not a good sign. Might not be your fault, But just in terms of practically you moving forward and getting that job, that is going to be an uphill battle at that point. The next thing that you never want to hear in a job interview is them saying anything along the lines of, oh, so you actually haven't blank. So what that means is they were under the impression you have done something or you were qualified in a certain way, but upon listening to you, they have come to the realization that you are not qualified in a very specific and important area. So if you ever hear them say, oh, you actually haven't done blank, that's a problem. And to counteract it, you might want to speak to, if you have done it first and foremost, but if you haven't, how some of the other things you've accomplished are similar, or you'd feel comfortable doing that because of some of your previous experience with A, B, and C. The next thing that you never want to hear in a job interview is in the middle of the interview, they go, okay, how about this? Why don't we talk about a different role that we have in our company, and it's a lower level role. That is them, in pretty plain English, telling you, you aren't qualified for this. Let me see if we have something with less scope that you might be a good fit for. It means you're probably not going to get the job that they're talking to you. I have never spoken to a qualified candidate I was interested in and in the middle of the interview said, let's talk about a lower role. If that happens, it's not a good sign. Now, the last thing that you never want to hear in a job interview is them saying something along the lines of, well, is there anything positive from your last job? Or is there anything positive about your previous team? What they're doing there is they're telling you, you have been incredibly negative, and it never behooves you to be negative in a job interview. That is not a good thing. So if you hear that, that's probably a bit problematic. So you never want to hear that in a job interview. Now that video is done, but you should watch this one. These are very easy mistakes to make in a job interview. Look, you're watching this, you want to do a good job. I want you to do a good job. I don't want you to make these mistakes. So please go watch this video so you don't make these easy to make interview mistakes.